Back when I was a teenager and a far more frequent reader of comics, my favorite monthly Batman series was Legends of the Dark Knight. If you're not familiar with it, Legends of the Dark Knight was an anthology series, and its stories were set in the early days of Batman's crime-fighting career, circa year one usually. It often wasn't specified exactly when the stories took place because it didn't matter. The purpose of the series wasn't to fill in Batman's backstory, it was to provide a platform for artists and writers to tell Batman stories unencumbered by present day continuity. Legends of the Dark Knight was a very necessary and greatly appreciated oasis away from the constant crossovers and company wide mega events that dominated superhero comics in the 1990s. While it was being published, you could always count on at least one new Batman book a month that wouldn't be one part of a multi-part crossover that required you to buy 5 or 6 other books just to keep up with it. It was wonderfully self-contained. The fact that it regularly featured the work of some of the best writers and artists in the business didn't hurt either. Not only was Legends of the Dark Knight a great book overall, it got off to one of the all-time great starts of any monthly Batman series. Its first 3 storylines are 3 of my very favorite Batman stories. I like them so much, I'm going to be devoting the next 3 videos in this series to those first 3 Legends of the Dark Knight stories, starting with this one, and a look at the story that ran through the first 5 issues of Legends of the Dark Knight, written by Dennis O'Neil, penciled by Edward Hannigan, and inked by John Beatty. It's a story called Shaman. It begins with Bruce Wayne in Alaska, tagging along with a man named Doggett, a bounty hunter on the trail of a criminal named Tom Woodley. They find Woodley as they're climbing up the side of a snow and ice-covered mountain. Find him when Woodley shoots Doggett dead, and then takes aim at Bruce. Woodley and Bruce fight, and in the end, Woodley plunges off a cliff to his apparent death, taking Bruce's coat and supplies with him, and stranding Bruce on the frigid mountain. Bruce tries to make it back down the mountain, but he knows it's hopeless. He has no equipment, no protection, there's a storm moving in, and the nearest town is a day's hike away. He's toast. Only the opposite of that, I guess. Still bad. Still really bad. Eventually, Bruce passes out and has a vision of the murders of his parents, only in this version, Thomas and Martha Wayne are gunned down by a killer snowman, which is genuinely hilarious. Look at the way he marches off into the darkness after the deed is done. You go on with your bad self, murdering snowman. Anyway, then the dream, or whatever it is, changes, and Bruce sees faces standing over him. One of the faces is wearing a ceremonial mask, a bat mask, and it's telling him a story, an ancient myth about a raven that fell sick, and the raven's friend, the bat, who willed itself to grow wings so that it could fan a mighty wind and blow the raven's sickness away. When Bruce wakes up, he finds himself in a cabin being tended to by this woman and her grandfather. She explains that they found Bruce unconscious in the snow while they were out tending to their traps and brought him back here, where her grandfather healed Bruce using the old ways. Grandfather is their tribe's medicine man, their shaman. Bruce is skeptical about all that shaman stuff, but he's grateful to the woman and her grandfather for saving his life. When he's strong enough to leave, the woman walks him back to town, and along the way she asks him not to tell anyone else about the healing story, the tale of the raven and the bat, that her grandfather told him. The story is sacred to their tribe, and Bruce is the first outsider to ever hear it. Bruce is like, sure, whatever. He invites the woman to come back to Gotham with him. I think he's a little sweet on her, but she says no, and they part company. Back in Gotham City, Bruce gets started on his career as Batman. It turns out this little mountain climbing episode takes place right before the start of Batman Year One. We get a few familiar scenes from that story, slightly reinterpreted through the lens of this one. When the bat crashes through the window, it reminds Bruce of the bat mask the shaman was wearing. And pretty soon, Batman is out in the streets doing his thing. His first night out, he saves his old friend Dr. Leslie Tompkins and one of her patients at her clinic from a gang of drug dealers who are robbing the place. But after Batman finishes with the gang, the young woman, Leslie's patient, is so disturbed by the sight of Batman that she picks up a knife, says something about Chubala, and stabs herself in the heart. Looking down at her dead body, Batman's like, huh, wonder what that was all about. Part 2 begins with a couple of cops interrupting a human sacrifice ritual being led by this guy, who is apparently that Chubala guy the woman who stabbed herself was talking about. One of the cops shoots Chubala, but Chubala just shrugs it off, kills that cop, and throws a knife into the back of the other cop as he flees the scene. The next day, the body of the dead cop and the human sacrifice victim are discovered, and Bruce Wayne drops by the scene to have a chat with Captain Jim Gordon. Gordon thinks the crime is drug-related somehow. Drug crime is becoming a major problem in Gotham, and he mentions to Bruce that the surviving cop, the one who ran away with a knife in his back, is at Gotham Central Hospital, and that he's been muttering something about Chubala. Bruce is like, well, thanks for the chat. I was just passing through and wanted to say hi. That's all. No other reason. Bye. As Bruce and Alfred are driving away, they chat about how the mention of Chubala connects this crime to the young woman who stabbed herself, which occurred 6 months ago, we now learn. Bruce decides to stop by the hospital and speak to that surviving cop. But first, he has to go to a fancy reception in honor of this guy, Dr. Madison Spurlock, an anthropologist who has just come back from studying that same indigenous tribe in Alaska that saved Bruce's life on the mountain. Bruce Wayne funded Spurlock's expedition and also told him the story of the Raven and the Bat. You know, the story the woman specifically told Bruce not to tell anybody. Nice job, Bruce. One of the items Spurlock has brought back from his time with the tribe is the bat mask used by the shaman in the telling of the healing story. Bruce also meets this guy, Bennett Young, the graduate student who worked as Spurlock's assistant on the trip to Alaska. Spurlock tells Young to get lost, and pretty soon after that, Bruce leaves as well. He makes an excuse to his date, can't fuck you, long day tomorrow, sorry, changes into his Batman costume, and goes to the hospital to see that injured cop. The cop mutters Chubala and also something about human sacrifice. Batman's like, human sacrifice, eh? On the roof of the hospital, Batman finds 3 guys from the gang doing the human sacrifice who have come to finish off the injured cop. Batman fights them off and ties them up for the police. In their pockets, Batman finds a lot of cash, some drugs, and an ID identifying one of them as the brother of the woman who stabbed herself at Leslie Tompkins' clinic. Later, Batman watches Dr. Spurlock make a TV appearance where he tells the story of the Raven and the Bat, the story Bruce told him, but claims that he heard it directly from an elder of the tribe. The spooky Chubala guy bails out the 3 punks Batman caught on the hospital roof and kills one of them to send a message to the other 2 that they'd better start doing a good job. Meanwhile, Bruce and Alfred are exploring the cave underneath Wayne Manor, which Bruce is considering turning into Batman's base of operations. When they go back topside, Bruce gets a call from Bennett Young, Spurlock's assistant, who wants to talk to Bruce about something urgent related to Spurlock. Bruce agrees to meet with Young that afternoon, but first he puts on a disguise as a homeless person and has a sneaky meeting with Captain Gordon at police headquarters, where Gordon informs him that the human sacrifice cult was made up of people from Santa Prisca, and that in addition to human sacrifice, they're also part of the recent surge in drug dealing in the city. Bruce is like, thanks for the info, Captain, and leaves. He changes clothes in the limo and arrives for his meeting with Bennett Young, but when he gets there, he discovers that Bennett Young has been stabbed in the chest. As he dies, his final word is Batman. Part 3 begins with Bruce searching for the killer. In the exhibit of artifacts Spurlock brought back from Alaska, Bruce notices that the shaman's bat mask has been stolen, as have the bow and arrows. Then he narrowly avoids being shot by one of those arrows. The cops show up before he can go looking for who shot it. Later, Bruce runs into this guy, a banker named Carl Fisk, who offers to buy some of Bruce's property. Bruce blows him off because he's got Batman shit to do. That night, he interrupts a drug deal involving the Chubala gang. A fight ensues, then another guy shows up wearing the shaman's bat mask and wielding the bow and arrows. Batman takes one arrow to the back, but manages to escape. The next day, he visits Dr. Spurlock and asks him about Chubala. Spurlock explains that Chubala is a vulture god worshipped by a cult on Santa Prisca. The cult believes that they can escape eternal torment after death by appeasing the vulture god through human sacrifice. Bruce is like, that's neat. Does Chubala have anything to do with the beliefs of that Alaskan tribe you studied? Before Spurlock can answer, he drops dead from an arrow in the back. The assassin in the shaman's bat mask strikes again. These recent killings and his inability to prevent them have left Bruce with his confidence badly shaken. He's not so sure about this Batman thing. What if he's just not good enough to do this? Still, with some reluctant encouragement from Alfred, who would be perfectly happy for Bruce to give up on Batman and, as he puts it, resign himself to a life of sanity, Bruce decides to return to Alaska and investigate the possible connection between the shaman he encountered there and this Chubala cult. When Bruce arrives in Alaska, to his shock, he finds the old shaman dancing for tips from tourists and taking a swig from a liquor bottle. The shaman's granddaughter, the woman Bruce had the hots for, appears to help him away, and Bruce runs up and introduces himself. The woman remembers him and smacks him in the face. Then she very kindly offers to give him a lift to a nearby lodge, and along the way, she explains that she blames Bruce for what has happened to her grandfather and her entire tribe because Bruce sent Dr. Spurlock to them and Spurlock introduced her people to drugs and alcohol. She even suspects he spiked her grandfather's drink with some kind of truth drug to convince him to spill his guts about all their old secret stories. That's why the old shaman dances for tips from tourists now, to make enough money to buy himself some booze so he can try and drink away his shame. Nice job, Bruce. The woman also tells Bruce that before Spurlock left the tribe, he stole her grandfather's medicine objects, including the bat mask. Then a car coming the other way smashes into them and they roll over a cliff into the icy water below. Oh no! Part 4 begins with Bruce heroically rescuing the woman and her grandfather from the water. He uses a torch from his utility belt, which he fortunately packed in his suitcase, to start a fire to keep them warm, but the woman isn't doing very well. Her grandfather, the shaman, tells Bruce to tell the healing story. The shaman can't tell it himself because he has disgraced himself and lost the power. But in Bruce's open suitcase, the shaman sees his Batman mask. You can tell it, says the shaman. You have the mark in your eyes. Thinking it's very silly but willing to try anything, Bruce puts on his Batman mask and tells an abbreviated and not very inspiring version of the story of the sick raven and his friend the bat who grew wings to blow away the sickness. Bruce initially assumes he's failed, but incredibly, his telling of the story seems to have worked. The shaman's granddaughter has stabilized. When the sun comes up, they're able to flag down help and get her to a hospital. When she's awake and feeling a bit better, she confirms a suspicion Bruce has been carrying about the identity of the bow and arrow wielding assassin in the shaman's bat mask. At the same time she and her grandfather saved Bruce, they also found and healed Tom Woodley, the man who killed Doggett and then fell off the ledge after fighting with Bruce. Through some freakishly good luck, he managed to survive his fall and be discovered, just as Bruce was. When Spurlock arrived to study the tribe, Woodley initially helped him to learn the tribe's secrets, but eventually Woodley came to despise what Spurlock was doing and vowed to return the stolen items, including the bat mask, but not before he used them to take revenge on those who had wronged the tribe. He killed Spurlock's assistant, Bennett Young. He killed Spurlock himself. Now the only target who remains is Bruce, the man who sent Spurlock to Alaska in the first place. Bruce encounters the old shaman outside the hospital, once again dancing for money from spectators. He offers to pay the old man enough that he won't have to continue doing this, but the old man refuses any charity. The shaman does, however, accept a lesser amount of money in exchange for telling Bruce a little bit more of the healing story. After blowing the sickness away from his friend the raven, the bat took the sickness and blew it into the nest of the vulture, and the vulture went away forever. On the plane ride home, Bruce reads over some files Alfred sent along to him and deduces the identity of Chibala, the one in the costume of the vulture god who's been conducting the human sacrifice rites in Gotham, but we don't get to know who it is yet. When Bruce gets back to Gotham City, he changes into his Batman costume and sneaks into the office of whoever Chibala is. He snoops around a little and finds a secret closet behind a bookcase in which he discovers the Chibala costume, a gun, and a scrapbook containing information about Dr. Spurlock's studies of the Alaskan tribe and the rituals of the shaman. Batman causes a ruckus in the office to intentionally attract the attention of the guards. Then he comes back the next day, disguised as a security consultant, goes back into the hidden closet, and makes a few alterations to Chibala's costume, pouring acid on his bulletproof vest, reloading the gun with blanks, and hiding a homing device and a few small explosives on the costume itself. Why didn't he just do all of this the night before when he snuck in as Batman? I have no idea. I guess because he didn't have the acid, the blanks, the homing device, and the explosives on him then? He had to go get them? Bruce drives home. It's Christmas Eve, by the way. But before he gets there, we cut to Wayne Manor and find Alfred in trouble, tied up and held at knife point by Tom Woodley, the assassin in the stolen bat mask. As the fifth and final part of the story begins, Bruce is walking up to Wayne Manor with Woodley lying in wait behind the front door. But Bruce notices that something is wrong. There are no footprints in the snow outside, which means for some reason Alfred hasn't left the house for a while. So he sneaks in another way and surprises Woodley. They fight, the fight spills outside, and eventually Woodley escapes into the woods. Bruce lets him go in favor of donning his Batman costume again and preparing to return to Gotham to finally take down Chibala, whose true identity he finally reveals to Alfred and to us as Carl Fisk, the banker. Remember that guy? Anyway, it's him. Financial records indicated that Fisk was close to bankruptcy 2 years ago. Now he's so flush with cash, he offered to buy property from Bruce Wayne. That, plus the bundles of crisp new large denomination bills that Batman found on those drug dealers he nabbed, and records indicating that Fisk had visited Santa Prisca, where both the drug trade and the Chibala cult originated, convinced Batman that Fisk was the culprit. Using the signal from the tracking device he planted on the Chibala costume, Batman locates the site of the next human sacrifice. He crashes the party and, taking advantage of the alterations he secretly made to the Chibala costume earlier, humiliates Chibala in front of his followers, showing him to be weak and powerless. Unmasked and abandoned by his cult, Fisk begs for mercy. "I had to do what I did," he insists. "I would have lost everything. I would have been poor." Batman, who is presumably way richer than this guy, is like, "Christ, what an asshole." Later, in the newly occupied Batcave, Bruce unloads the gun he took from Chibala and discovers, to his confusion, that the rounds it contained, a few of which Fisk actually fired, were not the blanks he had secretly loaded earlier, but live rounds. But if they were live rounds, why wasn't Batman harmed by them when Fisk shot him? Maybe his aim was off, Alfred suggests. "Yes," says Bruce. "That's got to be it." Batman ventures into the woods surrounding Wayne Manor in search of Woodley, who escaped after his home invasion earlier. Batman finds him, near death, having fallen on his knife during their earlier fight. Woodley gives Batman the shaman bat mask, saying he never should have worn it. Then Woodley dies. Bruce returns to Alaska. He finds the woman who helped him, the granddaughter of the shaman, working in a diner. She tells him that her grandfather died, but for what it's worth, he died sober. Bruce tries to make amends for the harm he's caused. He says that he told the press that the story of the Raven and the Bat, the story Spurlock revealed to the world, was just a lie, something Spurlock invented. But the woman tells Bruce that he's missed the point. The act of telling the story to a stranger was the problem, she says. Once that was done, it was done. Nothing could change it. Bruce confesses to this woman, whose name he doesn't even know apparently, that he has feelings for her, that he's interested in getting to know her better. She is not interested. She tells him to forget about her, and more, tells him that a normal life with a family is not for him. Something wounded you when you were a child. You have a choice. Either let go of it or use it. She tells him, that choice was made years ago. You know that. He tries to give her back the stolen shaman bat mask, but she doesn't want it. Keep it, she says. Then she turns her back and walks away. Batman puts the mask on display in the Batcave. Then we see him on a rooftop, looking out across Gotham City, as captions remind us of the addendum to the Raven and Bat story the old shaman shared with Bruce the last time they saw each other. After the Bat blew the sickness away from the Raven, he collected it and took it to the nest of the Vulture. The end! Shaman isn't as well remembered today as the other two early Legends of the Dark Knight stories I'm going to cover in upcoming videos of this series, especially the next one, which is a legitimate all-time classic, but we'll get there when we get there. However, Shaman is an excellent piece of work that deserves to be remembered and considered and critiqued. Let me begin with an obvious starting point for any comic book, the art. Edward Hannigan's work here obviously draws a lot of inspiration from David Mazzucchelli's art on Batman Year One, and that makes sense given that this story is positioned as taking place in a period of time that surrounds the events of the Year One miniseries, and even includes a few brief but crucial scenes in Part 1 that are retellings of bits from Year One. The similarities are appropriate, but it never feels like Hannigan is cribbing from Mazzucchelli. He is intentionally evocative of Mazzucchelli, but he is also doing his own thing. On top of Hannigan's pencils and John Beatty's inks, the color palette used by colorist Richmond Lewis is noticeably broader in comparison to that used in Batman Year One. The colors are still limited and subdued, but even in the largely monochromatic setting of the Alaskan mountain in the opening scene, the yellows and purples and blues pop out much more strongly than in Year One. Hannigan also has more of an opportunity to lean into the surreal and the outlandish than Mazzucchelli did. The story of Shaman has important elements which are mystical and mythical in nature, but overall it remains fairly grounded. Because of that, moments like Bruce hallucinating that a killer snowman murdered his parents, its bullets shattering them like ice, or the following pages, which illustrate the story of the Raven and the Bat through art styled after the work of ancient indigenous people of the Americas, make even more of an impression. Also, and pretty importantly, since this is a Batman book, Hannigan's rendering of Batman is pretty awesome. Again, early on, he's staying close to Mazzucchelli's take on the character, but by midway through, it's clear from little details like the shape of the head and the drape of the cape that Hannigan is making the character his own. The script is solid, as you'd expect from Denny O'Neil, one of the most important and influential Batman writers in the history of the character. Solid, which is not to say flawless. I think the proceedings do get a bit convoluted as the story goes along, with multiple villains dressed up as ancient gods, a criminal organization that is into human sacrifices and dealing drugs, and a connection between the bad guy in the Bat mask and the bad guy in the Vulture mask that feels strained at best. Plus, the plot gets really clunky toward the end as Batman fights Woodley, lets him go, goes to Gotham to take down Fisk as Chubala, then comes back to Wayne Manor to finish things with Woodley, then goes to Alaska to visit with the granddaughter of the shaman, who never even gets a name, then comes back to Gotham for the end. That's a lot of running back and forth, and as a result, the closing chapter of the story doesn't have much flow to it. The mysterious identities of the guy in the shaman's bat mask and the guy in the Chubala costume aren't all that surprising, especially if you're familiar with Roger Ebert's law of conservation of characters. And that bit with the car running them off the road into the frozen water ultimately reads like an awkward contrivance to get to the scene where Bruce has to put on his Batman mask to tell the healing story. It turns out the driver of the car was just some random doofus who wasn't watching where he was going. And there's a subplot in part 4 about Batman identifying the driver of the car, who just so happens to also be from Gotham City, and sending him a dead bat in the mail to convince him to turn himself in. It's such a hilariously ungainly bit of storytelling that it almost works in spite of itself. Almost. Despite those flaws, solid. There's a lot about the writing of this one that I really like. I appreciate the underlying themes about the exploitation and ruination of indigenous tribes by white people. I like the fact that the misfortune visited upon the tribe is all Bruce's fault. They saved his life. They healed him. All they asked in return is that he not tell people about them or their ways, and he couldn't even do that. He shrugged off his promise not to tell anyone else the story of the Raven and the Bat because he didn't take their culture seriously. He thought nothing of sharing the story with Dr. Spurlock and financing Spurlock's trip to study a community of people who clearly did not want to be studied. It's not a good choice by Bruce Wayne the person, but it's a very dramatically fruitful choice by Denny O'Neil the writer for Bruce Wayne the character. Bruce messes up, and he comes to regret it. I think what I love the best about Bruce's story with the shaman and the granddaughter is the way it concludes. There's nothing that lets Bruce off the hook. There's no scene where he's able to make good for what he's done or clear his conscience. The granddaughter offers him a bit of clarity regarding his choice to become Batman, but other than that, which is offered with more patience on her part than Bruce really deserves, she gives him nothing. No forgiveness, no absolution. He doesn't even get to see the shaman again before the old man dies. The granddaughter seems pretty stoic about the whole thing. There's nothing Bruce can do to change what he's done, or make up for it, because as she tells him, once it was done, it was done. Even letting him keep the shaman's bat mask reads less like a gift and more like a final act of resignation. She lets Bruce have it because she's done with it. It's of no more use or value to her. It's no good now to anyone but Bruce, the one who tainted it. In Shaman, O'Neil and Hannigan and their collaborators get a lot of mileage out of the power of the mask. The story imbues Batman with a mythic quality while keeping the proceedings mostly grounded by confining the mystical and mythical elements to the margins and by leaving room for skepticism even while strongly nudging us toward the more fantastical explanations of certain events. Bruce never quite comes to believe in the legends of the tribe, yet, without meaning it, merely by donning the mask of Batman, he becomes connected to those legends in a primal way. Bruce also suffers and causes suffering by disrespecting those legends. He eventually learns his lesson and seeks to make amends. So does Woodley in his own bloody way. It's significant that even though he is a murderer, Woodley is ultimately allowed to die a peaceful death on his own terms, being embraced by the cold, which he tells Batman in his dying moments he has lived with for a long time. Carl Fisk, aka Chubala, on the other hand, also a murderer, among other things, learns no lesson, feels no regret, and seeks to make no amends for his opportunistic exploitation of ancient legends. He doesn't die at the end of the story, but he is captured, humiliated in front of his followers, and left to face the kind of ruination that he started all of this to avoid. There is no parting grace note for him. The true villains of the story, Fisk, and let's not forget Spurlock, are wealthy and greedy people who plunder indigenous cultures for their own purposes and who exploit the vulnerability and fear of others for their own ends. And the hero of the story is a Batman who doesn't get everything right the first time, who, in fact, screws up pretty badly, even betraying the trust of people who helped him, but who also learns from his mistakes and doesn't give up. Those sure seem to me like qualities you'd expect to find in the best Batman ever.